All right, so today's deep dive is a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're actually only working with a single source this time.
Interesting.
It's an audio recording, and the title is pretty provocative.
Oh,
It's called African Migrants Refuse to Work in Mexico. Eye-opening video. .mp3.
wow. Just from the title,
Yeah,
you can tell we're going to hear some strong opinions.
for
Yeah.
sure.
It's amazing how just one voice can spark such a conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
It reminds us that, like, behind every headline,
Mhm.
behind all the statistics you see,
Right.
there are real people
Yeah.
dealing with real emotions.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're going to try to explore today.
Okay.
The speaker in this recording identifies as a Mexican citizen,
Okay.
and he is deeply concerned about the impact of African migrants in his country.
I see.
He does not hold back.
Okay.
And some of what he says might be hard to hear,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's important that we listen, to try to understand his perspective, even if we don't agree with everything he says.
Right. It's an opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
Not just about this particular situation, but also about how people form perceptions and narratives around these complex social issues.
Absolutely. So let's dive into it.
Okay.
He starts off by claiming that there was this agreement
Hey.
between former U.S. President Obama and the Mexican president to bring a large number of black migrants to Mexico
Okay.
from various African nations,
Hmm.
with the understanding that they would eventually enter the U.S.
Things are rarely black and white when it comes to international migration.
Right.
While I can't speak to the specifics of this alleged agreement,
Sure.
it's important to understand that migration flows are often influenced by like a web of factors.
Okay.
Like think about the economic disparities between nations,
Yeah.
political instability, humanitarian crises.
Right.
These all play a role.
Of course.
And these international agreements,
Hmm.
they can be incredibly complex, often involving multiple countries and addressing things like border control,
Uh-huh.
refugee resettlement,
Yeah.
even labor migration.
Wow. So it's not as simple as one agreement leading to a specific outcome.
No, not at
Mm.
all. And that's something to keep in mind as we kind of unpack this narrative.
Okay, so then he goes on to claim that the flow of migrants to the U.S. slowed down,
Yo.
leaving a large number stranded in Mexico.
I see.
He estimates over 10,000.
And that brings up a really important question about responsibility.
Right.
What happens when migrants find themselves in a country they hadn't planned to settle in?
Yeah.
Who bears the responsibility for their well-being?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the country they were passing through,
Yeah.
the country they were hoping to reach,
Right.
or maybe even the countries they originally fled from?
Wow, that's a lot to consider.
It is.
And the speaker in our recording seems to be grappling with this too,
Okay.
because this is where his frustration really boils over. He's angry that the Mexican government is providing these migrants with food, shelter, clothing money,
Mm-hmm.
resources that he believes should be going to Mexican citizens who are struggling.
Right.
He uses a really harsh term to describe the migrants.
Right.
He calls them parasites.
That word parasites is incredibly loaded.
Yeah.
It dehumanizes.
That-
and it
builds
really
up.
fuels a sense of us versus them.
For sure.
I think it's crucial to acknowledge the emotional weight of that language.
Yeah.
To understand how it shapes perceptions. You can hear the speaker's frustration,
Mm-hmm.
his feeling that someone is taking advantage of him, of his country.
Yeah, it's like a sense of betrayal almost. Like
Yeah.
the system is failing him.
Exactly.
And to add fuel to the fire, he talks about how many of these migrants are supposedly refusing to work,
Really?
even after being offered jobs.
Okay.
He argues that the pay is too low, but then he points out that he himself earns more than 90% of Mexicans and is still struggling.
So this is where, like, his personal experience
Yeah.
intersects with this broader narrative about migrants.
Right.
It's interesting because it reveals a deep awareness of income inequality
Mm.
within Mexico itself.
He seems to be saying, look, even those of us who are working hard are barely getting by, and now we're expected to support these newcomers who aren't even trying.
Yeah, and that sense of economic anxiety, that feeling of competition for limited resources, it's something we see a lot in these debates about migration.
Right.
It's important to acknowledge those anxieties,
Yeah.
those very real economic challenges,
Right.
while also challenging the generalizations and assumptions about entire groups of people.
He paints a pretty bleak picture,
He does.
and I think it's only going to get more intense as we delve further into his concerns about education and integration.
Okay. It does get more intense, but before we get into that,
Okay.
it's important to remember that this is just one source, like a snapshot of one person's perspective.
Yeah.
To really understand the complexity of migration, we need to zoom out,
Okay.
look at the bigger picture.
So zoom us out.
Okay.
So what's the bigger picture?
Migration is not a new phenomenon.
Right.
It's a global story that's been unfolding for centuries.
Mm.
People have always moved across borders
Mm.
for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
Seeking better opportunities, escaping conflict,
Right.
or even facing environmental pressures.
So we're talking like a constant ebb and flow of humanity across the globe.
Exactly. And throughout history,
Mm.
these movements have often been met with resistance and fear
Yeah.
from those already living in the destination countries.
Oh, for sure.
Think about it like Irish immigrants in the 19th century,
Right.
Italian and Eastern European immigrants in the early 20th century.
Mm.
And now we see these anxieties surrounding migrants from Latin America,
Yeah.
Africa, and the Middle East.
It's like these narratives of the other,
Yeah,
of outsiders posing a threat.
right.
And it obscures the human stories behind migration.
Absolutely. People forget that migrants are individuals with their own hopes and dreams. Right. And reasons for leaving their homes.
And they often make huge contributions to
Yeah.
their new societies.
They do. But the speaker in our recording seems to be really focused on these economic anxieties.
Yeah.
He feels like resources are being taken away from his community.
He mentioned earning more than 90% of Mexicans and still struggling. So it's not just about migrants. It's about a system that he feels is failing him, even as a hardworking citizen.
His frustration is multi-layered.
Right.
He sees these migrants as a symptom of a larger problem,
Okay.
like economic inequality and a lack of opportunity within Mexico itself.
So the presence of migrants becomes a focal point for his anger,
Exactly.
even though the root cause goes much deeper.
Yeah.
So how do we even begin to address these broader issues
Wow.
while ensuring the rights and needs of migrants are respected?
It is a tangled knot.
It is.
But I think the first step is recognizing the shared humanity in this situation.
Okay.
We need to move past this dehumanizing language.
Yeah.
It's like this us versus them mentality.
Easier said than done when you're hearing words like parasites.
Right. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of the language we use.
Yeah.
When we label people as parasites, we strip away their individuality, their dignity.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes easier to justify treating them poorly,
Right.
to deny them opportunities.
Yeah.
It's a really slippery slope.
Okay, so we recognize the humanity.
Mhm.
We check our language.
Yeah.
What's next?
Well, Sufer also brings up this issue of integration.
Right.
He seems to have really strong opinions
Yeah.
about how migrants should assimilate into Mexican society.
He talks about them needing to attend local schools,
Right.
learn the language.
Yeah.
Is that what successful integration looks like?
Well, his viewpoint reflects what's often called an assimilationist model,
Okay.
which places the burden of adaptation solely on the newcomer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while learning the language and understanding the culture are important for integration,
Yeah.
it's a two-way street.
So it's not just about migrants conforming.
Right.
It's also about the host society, creating a welcoming and inclusive environment.
Exactly. It's about building bridges, fostering understanding, creating spaces where different cultures can coexist and interact.
Right.
Imagine a society where individuals can maintain their unique identities, but also find common ground and build a shared future.
That sounds ideal, but I can see how it could get messy in reality.
Yeah,
There are bound to be challenges, cultural clashes, misunderstanding.
absolutely. Integration is a process,
Right.
and it doesn't always go smoothly.
Yeah.
The speaker in our recording brought up this idea of separate schools for Black migrants,
Yeah.
which raises a whole other set of complex questions.
He seemed really against that idea.
Yeah.
Why would migrants demand separate schools?
Well, if those demands are real, they could stem from a lot of different factors.
Okay.
Perhaps a desire to preserve their cultural heritage,
Right.
or a distrust of the existing education system,
Mhm.
or even a sense of safety and belonging within their own community.
Yeah.
It's important to understand those motivations before jumping to conclusions.
So even something like education
Yeah.
becomes really complicated
It does.
when you factor in these cultural differences
Right.
and individual experiences.
Exactly. And that's why we need to approach these conversations with nuance and a willingness to listen.
Right.
The speaker, despite his strong opinions, is clearly grappling with a sense of injustice. and a fear of losing something precious.
You can hear the desperation in his voice, especially when he talks about wishing the migrants had died during their journey.
That statement, while disturbing, highlights the depth of his despair.
Yeah.
His sense of hopelessness.
It's a reminder of how intense these emotions are.
Yeah. It underscores the need for constructive dialogue.
Yeah.
And effective solutions that address both the legitimate concerns of citizens
Right.
and the rights and needs of migrants.
It feels like we're only scratching the surface here of a very complicated issue.
Yeah.
I feel like we've uncovered way more questions than answers.
Yeah, that's often how these deep dives go.
Right.
Especially with such a complex and emotionally charged topic.
I keep thinking about the speaker in the recording.
Yeah.
His anger and frustration.
Yeah.
It's easy to just dismiss those emotions.
It is.
But I think it's important to try to understand where they're coming from.
I agree. Instead of just labeling him as like xenophobic or racist,
right,
we should ask, what are the underlying social and economic conditions that are contributing to these feelings?
Yeah.
How can we address those root causes in a way that promotes both individual well-being and social cohesion?
He mentioned that agreement between Obama and the Mexican president, implying it was like a root cause. Are these kinds of agreements common when we're talking about international migration?
International migration is often governed by these agreements between countries.
Okay.
Sometimes it's two countries bilateral. Sometimes it's multiple countries multilateral.
Okay.
They're designed to address various aspects of migration.
Okay.
Things like border control, refugee resettlement, even labor migration.
So these agreements exist?
Do.
But they're often complex.
They are.
And reflect the interests of the countries involved. It's not always about what's best for the migrants themselves.
Exactly. And sometimes these agreements can have unintended consequences.
Right.
Like the situation our speaker describes, where migrants end up stranded in a country that maybe doesn't have the resources to support them.
Yeah, it really highlights the need for like a more comprehensive and humane migration policy.
For sure.
That considers the well-being of both migrants and the receiving communities.
Exactly. We need to think globally.
We do.
Migration is a global issue.
Right.
It demands global solutions.
So what does that look like?
Well, we need to address those root causes of displacement.
Like, what are we talking about?
Poverty, conflict, climate change, and work toward a more just and equitable world, where people have the opportunity to thrive in their own communities.
That's a big goal, though.
It is a big goal.
What about the here and now?
Right.
There are millions of people on the move right now.
Yeah.
Seeking safety, opportunity, just a better life.
Right.
What can be done to ensure their rights are protected?
I think we need to advocate for policies that uphold the dignity and human rights of all migrants.
Okay.
Regardless of their legal status.
Okay.
This means access to basic necessities.
Right.
Food, shelter, healthcare.
Yeah.
As well as opportunities for education, employment, and social integration.
It's not just about surviving.
No.
It's about thriving.
Exactly. And I think it requires a shift in perspective.
Okay.
We need to move away from seeing migrants as a burden or a threat.
Right.
And start recognizing the contributions they make to our societies.
Yeah.
They bring diverse skills, experiences, and perspectives.
Right.
And that enriches our communities and contributes to our economic and cultural vitality.
So what can our listeners do, like right here, right now?
Right now.
To contribute to a more informed and productive conversation about migration?
Well, first and foremost, educate yourself.
Okay.
Read articles. Listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Engage with organizations that are working on migration issues.
Okay.
Seek out diverse perspectives. Challenge your own assumptions.
Don't just stay in your echo chamber.
Exactly. Engage in respectful dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Listen actively. Try to understand the other person's point of view, even if you don't agree with it.
Right. And remember the human element.
Yes.
Like behind all the statistics and the headlines, these are real people with real stories.
Humanize the issue by learning about those individual journeys and the challenges migrants face. Support organizations that are providing essential services and advocating for their rights.
Right.
Volunteer your time, donate to worthy causes, and use your voice to speak up for those who are often marginalized and silenced.
I think this deep dive has been a roller coaster.
It has. Going from a single opinionated source to the complexities of global migration.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process.
It is, and it's a reminder that even the most challenging issues can be tackled if we approach them with curiosity, empathy, and a willingness to learn from each other.
So as we wrap up,
yeah,
we leave you with this question.
Okay.
Given all that we've discussed, what approaches could lead to more humane and sustainable solutions for both migrants and host countries?
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going.
Right.
The world needs your informed and compassionate voice.